Erie Community College Archives Collection. A Verbal History of Erie Community College by James E. Shenton, Tape 1. This is Wednesday, June 9, 1982, and I have with me this morning Mr. James E. Shenton, former president of Erie Community College. Mr. Shenton has graciously consented to render a verbal history of ECC for the College Archives Collection. Mr. Shenton, how did you first become associated with Erie Community College and community colleges in general?
My first contact with the community college movement really predates our beginning at Erie Community College in 1946. It came about as I was pursuing graduate studies at Cornell University, and one of my courses involved the use of a committee report concerning the Regent's post-war plan for higher education. This is World War II post-war plan. In that plan, the Board of Regents had envisioned a community college or two-year technical college system in New York State that numbered 22 institutions. 11 of these institutions were to be in New York City and 11 were to be upstate in New York. In this way, they always kept a balance between the New York City area and upstate New York. The Regent's post-war plan envisioned an elaborate spread of these two-year schools across New York State. In 1946, when this plan finally was put into effect, the 22 schools had been reduced to simply 5, and these were 5 pilot institutes of applied arts and sciences that were to be located in New York City, White Plains, Binghamton, Utica, and Buffalo. The enrollment was balanced out in this manner that the 5 schools would have a total of 4,400 students. There would be 2,250 in New York City, and there would be 500 in Binghamton, 500 in White Plains, 500 in Utica, and 750 at the Buffalo School. This plan was put into effect in April of 1946 when the state legislature passed the empowering legislation. This was my first introduction to the two-year schools as they came about following World War II. I was fortunate to be on what appeared to be the ground floor of a new movement. My professor at Cornell University, Dr. Emerson, had been secretary of the state committee, and thus we had access to the minutes of the very early planning of these two-year schools. I was fortunate in this respect, and that gave me a connection that finally led to my being employed by the Institute in Buffalo in December of 1946. Our first director was Richard R. Dry, who had been formerly principal of the Technical High School in Buffalo. Mr. Dry came on board in October of 1946 as the first employee of this new school known as the New York State Institute of Applied Arts and Sciences at Buffalo. At this time, we were under control of the State Education Department because in 1946, the State University had not even been created. Mr. Dry proceeded to hire a small staff of people that numbered about 12 by the time January 1st, 1947 rolled around. It was our responsibility in those very early days to put together the curricula for 8 new programs that were to be offered at the Buffalo Institute. We also had the responsibility of securing equipment, of renovating the building, and by the way, the building happened to be at 1685 Elmwood Avenue, which was the office building of the former Piracero Motor Car Company. Buffalo was famous for the Piracero Motor Car, and we occupied what was the administrative or office building located directly on Elmwood Avenue. At that time, the building did not have any walls inside. It was an office building primarily, and it was our responsibility to plan the renovation of the building so that it could be used as a school situation. The 8 programs that I mentioned a moment ago consisted of construction technology, dental hygiene, electrical technology, mechanical technology, food service administration, chemical technology, metallurgical technology, and optical technology, which we now call ophthalmic dispensing. During the springtime of 1947, additional people were hired, many to head up these departments. Dr. Ernest Notar, who later became president of Niagara Community College, was the first department head in construction technology. Dr. George Skinner was the department head of dental hygiene. Mr. Clarence Bensman was the head of electrical technology. Mr. Otto Ginther was head of the mechanical and metallurgical technology departments. The food service department was headed up by Mrs. Grace Hunt, and the chemical technology department by Mr. Rex Billings, and our optical department by Frank Brandstetter. These were the first 8 department heads that came on board early in the spring of 1947. During the spring of 1947, our efforts, our energies were all directed to getting the school ready to take in the first class in the fall of 1947. This required a great deal of work on the part of everyone that was on board at the time. At that time, we'd also hired our head librarian, Mrs. Ruth Lake, or Mrs. McDonald, as she was later known. The staff at that time had the responsibility of putting together the courses of study for each curriculum. We also had the responsibility, 2 of us, Mr. Panton, who headed up the mathematics department at that time. Mr. Patton and myself did a lot of the layout work for the dividing up of the building into the various classroom and laboratory areas. At this time, we, as I said, was going through the various warehouses looking for equipment that would fit into our 8 programs at the Buffalo Institute. We also had the problem of laying out and renovating the building on Elmwood Avenue. It's hard to believe that what we had in January of 1947 could ever be turned into an operating institute by the fall of that year. The basement was entirely empty. There was nothing there at all. We had just 1 or 2 lights. It was a very dark basement, and I recall on a number of occasions when people went down in the basement, we would pick up a block of wood or something that was handy and throw out in the darkness, and you'd hear the rats scurry around to get out of the way as we made our way across this dark basement. It didn't seem possible at that time that we could possibly put this building into shape. The first floor had office spaces which were very easy to convert into departmental offices and laboratories. Our library was on the first floor, and we didn't have to do anything with that. But when you once got to the second and third floor, these were simply long open rooms that had to be completely divided by block walls. And this meant that we had to sublet contracts. Contracts were let for heating, contracts were let for lighting, contracts were let for the masons to construct the rooms, the classroom walls. We had to get contracts for putting up the lighting, the various aspects, the wallboards, the chalkboards, and all that material had to be all planned and put into process by a group of people who were essentially educators and faculty people, and it presented a real problem, a real challenge for all of us. During the springtime, we also had many truckloads of material coming in, and always the truck driver would come in and wanted to know who would unload this equipment. Well, there wasn't anybody there but us, so the call would go out to put on your old clothes, and we would change into some of our old work clothes and go to the back door of the building, and there would be a long semi-trailer loaded with chairs, tables, all manner of equipment that had been salvaged from our warehouses across the state. It was our job, because the driver of the truck was not obligated to unload the truck. We did it. We had to go out and we unloaded the trucks. We brought the material into the building, and finally we did the setting up. While this was going on, the contracts were let for the laying up of the block walls on the second and third floors. This took a lot longer than we expected, and by the time September rolled around, we were still not ready for the students to come in. We'd begun to staff the library. The library books were coming in. Things were taking shape in that area. We also had to open a bookstore. Mr. Panton and myself were the first 2 persons to run the bookstore, and we did this also as part of our job in opening up the school. Finally, the latter part of 1947, September that year, we thought we were ready. We had to open the school because time was running out on us, even though we were not prepared for the students to come in. We accepted, in the 8 curricula, we accepted about 60 students in each program. And we had somewhere in the vicinity of 450 students coming in that first class. The students were quite shocked, I'm sure, when they came into the building to find that in many areas the block walls were not even up for the classrooms. In some places, there was simply a chalk line on the floor that indicated where the wall would go. In other areas, the wall was up maybe 5 courses of block, and we had the brick masons laying up blocks at the same time that the students were in the classroom. We had a rather hilarious incident reported in the social studies class one day when they were talking about labor unions, and the class was in the middle of the discussion when suddenly the brick mason up on the scaffolding overhead cut into the classroom discussion to talk about labor unions and how it affected the brick masons. This was a little extra that the students or the faculty member had not planned on, but it just showed you the involvement of not only the faculty but also the brick masons who were working at that time. Laying up the block walls also presented a real problem at times when the blocks had to be cut to make certain fits in the wall, and they used a large emery wheel to cut the blocks. And if anyone has been around construction work and knows the sound of a block being cut by an emery wheel, you can realize that the screeching that came about put a complete stop to all classroom instruction in that area while the blocks were being cut. This is just one idea of the kind of conditions that we started with in the very beginning of the Institute in Buffalo. At this time, we were not ready to serve the students in the cafeteria. Our cafeteria equipment had not been completely installed, and that gives rise to a recollection of mine that took place in the spring of 1947 when Mrs. Grace Hunt and I were in New York City for a period of 4 weeks. It was our job to go out to the Bethpage Navy warehouse on Long Island and secure equipment not only for the Buffalo Institute but for all of the 2-year schools in the state, which was the other 4 institutes of applied arts and sciences, as well as the 6 ag and tech institutes that were already in operation. Mrs. Hunt and I spent the 4 weeks in New York and out on Bethpage tagging equipment, all kinds of mainly kitchen and cafeteria equipment, which was a huge installation there that had been provided by the Navy. It was our job to disconnect, to see that the equipment was disconnected, that it was sorted, that it was assigned to the various schools, that it was loaded on trucks and dispatched to the various 2-year colleges in New York State. This is an experience that I'm sure Mrs. Hunt and I would never forget, because we had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning in order to catch the Long Island Railway in order to get us out to Bethpage in time to go to work at 8 o'clock. Since the cafeteria equipment was coming in that late, it was not possible for us to have the food service area in operation in the fall of 1947. Consequently, we did set up a temporary cafeteria in one of the physics labs for the students during the first few months of our school year in the fall of 1947. And I guess while I'm reminiscing, I could also go back a little bit further and tell you that the story was that when Mr. Dry came on board in the fall of 1946, there was no furniture for him, and the only place he had to sit, at least the story goes, is on an old nail keg that he found there. We were also told that at that time the pigeons were flying around up in the 3rd floor of the building. This may be true, I don't know. I never saw a pigeon when I came there. Getting back to the fall term of 1947, when the students were actually enrolled in classes, it's of interest to note now that there was no tuition at that time. We were under the state education department, and higher education was tuition-free in New York State. So consequently, our students did not pay any tuition at that time. They did, however, pay for their books, and they did pay a student activity fee, which was to cover the newspaper, the yearbook, and the various student activity programs that we had. It is also interesting to note that in the very beginning, the programs in construction, electrical, mechanical, chemical, and metallurgical technology were all under what is known as the co-op program. This is Cooperative Employment Program, where the students would spend part of the school year on a job and part back in school. It so happened that we had to divide our school year into 4 quarters. And the student would spend, over the 2-year period, he would spend 6 quarters in school he would alternate for 2 quarters in school or on the job. Thus, at the end of his 2 years, a student would have completed 6 quarters of instruction and 2 quarters on a cooperative type of employment. The jobs were found by the school. The students would be interviewed by industry and placed on a job, and they would work for 3 months, back in school for 3 months, work for 3 months, and back in school again. In this way, the student was given an excellent opportunity to find out whether they liked the type of work they'd selected. It also was a great motivating factor for the student to do better in his schoolwork when he came back, having seen the application of some of his schoolwork, some of the theory that he was learning, seeing that applied actually in industry. The co-op program was, we felt, extremely successful. It provided the students with not only the experience, but it also provided them with a little money, which was also needed to buy books and things while they were at school. I think the first year of school, after the construction was completed and all the equipment was hooked up, connected, and so forth, that the year was completed in a rather good style, and we started by, in the spring of 1948, we started interviewing for the incoming class in 48, which would be our second year in operation. We were to take in approximately 400 students again. There would be some attrition with our first year students, and then again we had our top enrollment figure mandated by the state of 750 students. So with our incoming class, the class of 1950, because the first class in 47 was known as the class of 49, was coming into the class of 1950. We were really in full gear. The school was operating. All the programs were going. Our equipment was in. Our books were in. Everything seemed to be going very well at that time. The co-op program had been initiated, and that was working very successfully with a number of companies all across the Niagara frontier. Before leaving 1947, there were a couple of other items that had come to mind that I think should be recorded at this time. First was, the first item is an oversight on my part, and that is that the very important person that was on board in the early part of 1946, the fall of 46, was our assistant director, Mr. Lawrence E. Spring. He played a very big part in the initiation and entering of the program into the Niagara frontier. Mr. Spring was named assistant director and also registrar and director of the evening program. Later on, he became the second president of the college. And Mr. Spring certainly could be mentioned at this time. There are a couple of other incidents that took place in the spring of 47 that I'm sure those of us involved will never forget. As you might expect at this time, we were sort of far cousins as far as the state was concerned. We'd just been put in operation. We were on special payrolls. We did not have the regular pay periods that the rest of the state employees had. Consequently, our paychecks would come in at any time. Sometimes it might be 3 or 4 weeks delayed before we got our paychecks. This was because we were on a special payroll in Albany and just had to get it when they were ready to give it to us. There also was another incident that happened in the spring of 47, concerned our purchasing. Recalling that all of our work had to go through Albany because we were fully state funded at this time, it meant that our purchase all had to be processed through the Central Purchasing Office in Albany, New York. This posed a real problem because, again, we were an extra burden on the purchasing department, and as the end of the fiscal year came close, we were told by the purchasing department that they could not process any of our purchase orders. It meant then that we couldn't encumber the money in the 1946 state budget. However, we were told if we could send down some secretaries and some technical help, we could occupy the purchasing department on weekends, and we would do the actual writing of the purchase orders. Consequently, one weekend in March of 47, about 8 of us from Buffalo, there were a couple of secretaries, a group from Binghamton, a group from Utica, from White Plains, and from Brooklyn. We all descended on Albany Friday night, ready to start work Saturday morning, and we took over the purchasing department, that was not working over the weekend. Under the supervision of 2 or 3 people from the Albany Purchasing Department, we took our requisition list had the secretaries write purchase orders for all of the equipment for not only our school but also the other 4 schools. In this way, it was possible for us to encumber the monies before the end of the fiscal year. This operation was carried out on 2 different weekends. We'd work all day Saturday, all day Sunday. Late Sunday evening, we'd catch the train back to Buffalo, ready to go to work Monday morning. This kind of operation was carried on 2 weekends in order for us to expedite all of our purchase orders and get the money encumbered before April 1st of 1947. We did this. There was no comp time. There was no extra pay. It was just part of the job that everybody felt had to be done at that time. Another, maybe a little bit of interest is the layout of the building on Elmwood Avenue. Of particular interest and what the students got a big kick out of was the large arched room on the 2nd floor. It was a huge 2-story room with an arched ceiling that had been the cafeteria for the Pierce Arrow workers. They came from the factory through tunnels into the administration building and then went up to the 2nd floor for their lunch. This became our auditorium, but the arched roof had been declared unsafe, so there had to be steel columns and beams put up to support the roof of this huge vaulted room. This room became affectionately known by all the students as Girder Hall. It provided us not only with an auditorium, a place for dance, a place for exhibits, and many of the activities that went on student-wise as a group was carried on in Old Girder Hall. One of the activities that I'd like to mention at this time was the school newspaper. It was entitled in those days the Buffalo Technical Institute News, BTI News. And it came out September 29, 1947, was the very first edition. And by the way, we have copies of all the student papers dating back to that very first issue of the very first volume. In connection with this, I think it would be well to explain something about the nickname that the college had at the time. Miss Cornell, who was the head of the comm skills, which later became the English department, had suggested that down the street a few blocks was the Teachers College, and they went under the name of Buffalo State Teachers College, BSTC. And since we were a sister institution under the State Ed Department, it was conceived that we could trade on that, and we became BSTI, Buffalo State Technical Institute. And many people thought that this was the official name of the college. It was carried in our own newspaper, our own student paper. It was carried in a lot of memoranda that went out. In fact, one of the banners that we have in the archives room today is Buffalo State Technical Institute. But this was, in essence, really a nickname and not the official name of the school. The school was still officially known as the New York State Institute of Applied Arts and Sciences at Buffalo. I think this clears up some misconceptions that a lot of people have concerning the name of the school.
In 1948 saw another major change in the organizational structure of all public higher education in New York State.
Originally, the Board of Regents, with the State Education Department as the administrative arm, controlled all higher education, or all public higher education in the state of New York. This meant that the teachers' colleges, the 6 ag and tech schools, our 5 institutes of applied arts and sciences, the Forestry College at Syracuse, Ag at Cornell, Home Ec at Cornell, so forth, all of these schools were under the State Education Department and under the Board of Regents. In 1948, Governor Thomas E. Dewey created on paper the State University of New York. And why I say it's on paper, because all that was done was to collect all of the institutions of higher education, that is the public institutions of higher education in the state, and simply say this is the State University of New York. All of the institutions I just mentioned now became a part of that higher education system. And the Institute at Buffalo was one of many that became now an integral, a positive part of the state university. I might say that Governor Dewey actually forced this change through. The Board of Regents resisted it very much, and when the new state university was created, there was a separate board of trustees established for State University.
This board, there was competition or some antagonism, some feeling between the Board of Trustees of State University and the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents, however, is still the supreme governing body of all education in the state of New York. But there was a certain amount of feeling between the State Education Department and the State University, and that feeling really existed for a great many years, a certain antagonism, a certain feeling that the State University should not have been separated from the State Ed Department. However, this was the plan. It, I guess, has proved to be successful. It did provide New York State and the residents of New York State with a very, eventually a very large and very positive system of higher education for all the residents of New York State. It might be mentioned, speaking about the residents of New York State, that at this time all of those units were tuition free. There was no tuition paid by any student going to a public institution of higher education. They did have to pay activity fees, of course, had to buy their book supplies and that type of thing. But there was no tuition until several years later. It also might be mentioned that a person who was very instrumental in the establishment of the two-year schools and was a great friend in Albany was Dr. Lawrence L. Jarvie. Under the State Ed Department, he was an assistant commissioner for higher education in charge of the two-year schools. When the State University was formed, he moved over into the administrative area of the State University and became the executive dean for two-year schools in the State University system. Dr. Jarvie played a very, very important part in the establishment of the two-year technical colleges in the state of New York at that time. Another event that was of great interest to us in Buffalo was the dedication of the Institute at 1685 Elmwood. This took place on January the 27th, 1949, almost 2 years after the school had started. But this probably was due to the fact of the change of the State Ed Department to the State University. And on that date in January 49, Dr. Alvin C. Urich, who was then the first president of the State University of New York, came to Buffalo and presented the Institute with what is the closest thing we have to a charter. It is simply a document which excerpts the education law creating the State University and the two-year colleges. Attached to that is a pen that was used by Governor Dewey in signing this declaration. I guess, as I say, this is probably the closest thing we have to a charter. It hangs on the wall in our present archives room. Also in 1949, after 2 years of operation, saw the first commencement. The class of 1949 was graduated on September 29, 1949. It seems an odd date, but if you recall, with the co-op program using 11 of the 12 months out of the year, and starting in September 47, it took us almost almost 2 years to complete the program. Consequently, our first graduation was held September 29, 1949, in Kleinhans Music Hall. There were 323 graduates in the first class, and the first commencement speaker was Dr. Lewis Wilson, who was with the State Ed Department and had been a strong advocate of technical education in the state of New York and had gone back many years and was very instrumental in the Regent's post-war plan setting up these two-year institutes. So it was very appropriate that Dr. Wilson was the first commencement speaker, and he was introduced by Dr. Jarvie, who was then with the State University system. The year 1950 saw another law enacted in the state of New York, which was to have a great impact on our institute. I have reference to what is now known as the Community College Law. This was actually passed in 1950. It's the Article 126 of the State Education Law, which defines community colleges within the state framework. It sets up the method of operation. It sets up the fact that there will be 9 trustees of a community college. 5 of these trustees will be appointed by the local sponsor, and 4 will be appointed by the state or the governor. It spells out the duties of the trustees. It spells out the financial arrangement for community colleges, and briefly it's this, that the operating costs of the community colleges shall be split 3 ways. 1/3 by student tuition, 1/3 by the sponsor's donation. In most cases, that's the county's, and 1/3 by the state. The capital costs, which has to do with equipment and buildings, were to be split 50-50, a half by the sponsoring institution and a half by the state. This community college law was going to pose somewhat of a problem for us in the fact that the 5 institutes of applied arts and sciences under the state university were completely state-supported, completely state-funded. And as I mentioned, there was no tuition at any of these institutions at that time. However, the problem lay in the fact that the community colleges were sponsored by the local government, as I said, in most cases, counties. It has to be realized that we'd been in operation for some 3 or 4 years prior to this, and the local sponsor, the county, had not put 1 penny into the running of the school. In fact, we weren't under the jurisdiction of the county, the local sponsor, in any way. So it immediately created the problem of the local sponsor wanting to accept the operation of the institute. This led to a 2 or 3 year period of where we were hanging in limbo. We were hanging by our thumbnails, really, because it took that amount of time for the local sponsors to accept the sponsorship of the Institutes of Applied Arts and Sciences. In our situation in the county of Erie, Erie County was not happy to accept the sponsorship. They felt they had never been in the field of education, and they felt that they did not want to get into it at this time. I think the other 4 institutions, the other 4 institutes of applied arts and sciences, were having somewhat of the same problems. I know at Broome County, the Broome County resisted the initiation of the community college in Broome County. So we went through a period of 2 or 3 years in which we really didn't know whether the school was going to remain in existence or not. Each year it would be put off, the decision would be delayed, as there was, I guess you'd call it, political maneuverings went on at the state level and the county level. There has been a great deal of letter writing, lobbying by the 5 institutes to Albany, explaining why we should remain under the state university system. And very frankly, this is what at that time we wished to do. We were familiar with the operation, and of course, having a new sponsor, a new financial arrangement, did pose somewhat of a threat. During these 2 or 3 years of 1950 to 53, we were kind of at a state of limbo, as I said, because people did not know just what to expect. We had some people leave our faculty because they weren't sure they were going to have a job next year. Finally, it boiled down to almost a directive. Mr. Frank Moore, who was lieutenant governor and a very powerful figure, a native of Kenmore, finally came to the Board of Supervisors. At that time, Erie County was not under the charter system, so we had 54 town supervisors running the county government. And Mr. Moore came to Buffalo, Erie County, in about 1953, and told them that the alternative was either you take these schools or the school will be closed. It became almost an ultimatum. The state had carried us for 2 to 3 years, and they finally said either get under the county sponsorship as a community college or the school will close. So Mr. Moore came to Erie County with that, I would call it an ultimatum, just about saying that the county must undertake the sponsorship of the Institute of Applied Arts and Sciences. This was done, I'm sure, very reluctantly by Erie County. As I said, they did not want any part of education. It was an extra financial burden for the county, and they were not particularly happy about having to do it, but they did. The faculty of the Institute at that time was asked if they would want a representative. Mr. Dry asked the faculty if they would like a representative at the first meeting between the county officers and the new board of trustees of the Institute at Buffalo. And the faculty, I was fortunate enough to be elected to be the faculty representative at this first meeting. And I have a vivid recollection of the meeting of the county officials. Mr. Jacob Tick, who's the county comptroller, was the chief fiscal officer and really spoke for Erie County at that time. There was the county attorney and several others here. And Dr. Jarvie, I believe, was here at that time too. And they were told that, I recall very vividly, Elmer Wild, who was the county attorney, saying that they were there to officiate at the shotgun wedding between the college and the county. Of course, this is a completely different aspect, a completely different way of becoming a community college than some of the schools later, where the counties actually petitioned the state to grant them the charters for community colleges in their separate counties. The 5 institutes were actually forced under county sponsorship at that time or go out of existence. I think an understanding of this historical fact gives better understanding of the relationships that exist between the county and the college. With the change of sponsorship, of course, there came the change of name. The New York State Institute of Applied Arts and Sciences at Buffalo went out of existence, and in its place, the Erie County Technical Institute became the new name for the college. It should also be mentioned that Mr. Dry, the first director, who was the title was later or had been changed to president, his term was extended for another year beyond his mandatory retirement age in order for he to facilitate this transfer of sponsorship from the state university to the local Erie County government. Following Mr. Dry's retirement in 1954, Mr. Spring, who had been the assistant director and director of our evening program, became the second president of the then Erie County Technical Institute. During these years, there were 2 things that took place that had a direct bearing upon our students. The first one is the imposition of tuition. In September of 1953, for the first time, the students were charged a tuition. This tuition at that time was $250 per year. Also, the classes of 49 and 50 did not receive the associate degree. The associate degree was not awarded until the class of 51. There had been considerable talk in 52 and 53 about the fact these students in the early classes did not receive the associate degree. Therefore, through Albany, it was decided that 3 or 4 classes, special classes, should be set up in the evening division, allowing these graduates of the 2 classes to take 2 courses additional that would qualify them for the associate degree. And this came under the operation of our evening division. The 4 courses were set up. Notices were sent out to the graduates of 49 and 50 that the associate degree would be made retroactive to them upon successful completion of 2 of these 4 courses. I don't know how many of the graduates took advantage of it, but I'm sure there were a considerable number who came back in order to qualify for the associate degree at that time. Before leaving those very early years under the presidency of Mr. Dry, there are a few other memories that come to mind. One was our first, what might be called the faculty dining room. For several months, those of us in those early days used to brown bag it. We'd bring our lunch and eat lunch around our desk. At that time, Mrs. Hunt, who was head of the food service department, rather appropriately suggested that we might better all throw in a little bit of money each week, and she would buy bread, the makings of sandwiches, tea, coffee, and beverage, and we set up what was, as I say, the first faculty dining room. It took place in what was eventually to become the student health clinic and the receiving room. They rigged up a little old sink, and we scrounged around and found an electric hot plate and a coffee maker, and with this little bit of equipment, we started our first faculty dining area. It was provided a source of relaxation, a little bit of camaraderie. We could get together and joke a little bit, and it was kind of like a family situation. Each week, one faculty member would be designated as the preparer of the food, and another member would be designated as the cleanup person. This went on for a number of months, providing us with a little bit of a relaxation, a little bit of fun, and it was kind of like a family get-together for us. Also in those early days, we did have a number of student activities that I think should be mentioned too. Even with the limited space that we had, the students entered into the activity program with a great deal of enthusiasm. It should be recalled that at this time, most of our male students were somewhat older. They were all veterans returning from World War II. And they, I guess you'd call them a little bit of activists at that time even, because they did want to take part in student government, student council work, and they were very active in helping formulate their own programs. And some of the people in that time later became leaders in industry around Western New York. The yearbook that we have today at the North Campus, called the Arrow, started in 1949, and the name came partly from the fact that we were in the Pierce Arrow building, but also from the symbolism of an arrow, something straight. And I think that's what the intention of the Arrow was to be, a straight, good annual book of the student work. The BTI News, which I mentioned earlier, later became the Institutor and is finally now the Element. These were all very actively underwritten and engaged in by the students at that time. There were a variety of clubs, many of them attached to the various curricula. There was a chemical technology club, there was a metallurgy club, and a great many of the student activities centered around their vocational interest in their various departments. We also had a band at that time that was directed by Mr. Lynn Claypool and Mr. Olson. An athletic council was formed, and even with the very limited, really no athletic facilities, the council did give direction to the starting of an athletic program. Mr. Whitmore, Norman T. Whitmore, who later became vice president of North Campus, was the first athletic director and did a great deal to bring varsity sports even in those first 2 or 3 years of the Institute. In basketball, Mr. Golliber, who was from the physics department, was the coach, and Mr. Fitzgibbons from the electrical department coached baseball. Tennis we had at the time, and that was coached by Mr. Davis of the optical department, and golf was coached by Mr. Olson. Basketball was played in various gymnasiums that could be rented. Many of the local high schools, we would play in those gyms when they became available. One of our first rented facilities was the 174th Armory at Connecticut and Niagara Street. There was a game played there. The varsity basketball team challenged the faculty to a game that first year, and I think the game would be remembered by all that was there, not by the quality of the basketball, but by the very hilarious costumes that were worn by the faculty members. Such outfits as a hockey uniform, a football uniform, baby outfits, all went to make up a very funny and a very pleasing evening. This took place before one of our regularly scheduled varsity basketball games. Speaking about athletics, our first real athletic director was Mr. Larry Katzman. He came on board in about 1951, and I can still hear Mr. Dry talk about Katzman and his cats, and thus came the nickname for our athletic teams that still persist to this day, the Erie County Cats. Some years later, Mr. George Killian became the athletic director, and our sports program really moved into high gear with when he came on board. George later became the executive director of the National Junior College Athletic Association, a position that he still enjoys to this day. Following Mr. Dry's retirement in 1954, Mr. Spring, who had then became known as Dean, moved up to the presidency. Mr. Spring was a very friendly and understanding type of person, very popular and very easy to work for. At that same time, Dr. Ernest Notar was promoted from the head of the construction department program to dean, and Mr. Harry Panton was moved from the mathematics department to head of the construction department. Shortly before that, Mr. Otto Ginther, who was head of the mechanical and metallurgical department, was asked to move to Troy, New York, and supervise the startup of an institute there. This eventually became known as the Hudson Valley Community College. With Mr. Ginther's promotion to the school in Troy, it left open the opportunity for promotion to the head of the mechanical department and the metallurgical department, which I was fortunate enough to secure for the mechanical department. Mr. Harry Cassidy became head of the metallurgical department. It was not too long before it became quite evident that our temporary buildings would not be sufficient to take care of the students that we had. More and more applicants were coming every year, and we could accept only so many. The 8 curricula were all filled. In our evening division, which had proven to be very popular, this was also crowded. The Institute was really filling a vital need in the educational spectrum. Our goal had always been to train for the intermediate level of technical occupations. That is the large area between the professional person, an engineer, for example, and the skilled tradesman. Our graduates were to be very knowledgeable assistants for the professional practitioner. The fact then, as now, was that our graduates got the jobs. It was not very long then, certainly by 1957, 56 and 57, that thoughts were given for a new building program. We needed our own permanent buildings, a new campus. A number of sites were looked at. One was the Grover Cleveland Golf Course at Main and Bailey, next to the UB campus. I'm sure the golfers would have raised a fuss if this had ever been seriously proposed. Another site at the rear of Buff State College on Reese Street had been considered. The Goodyear property in the town of Amherst was also looked at. Finally, it was decided that the present site that we now use for the North Campus at Main and Youngs Road was the site to be used, and 120 acres of land was purchased at that time. It developed that not many large parcels of land were available in the city of Buffalo, and consequently the move was made to the suburbs. I can remember Dale Bossert, who was director for the public works of the county, saying that in a few years no one would know whether they were at Bailey Avenue or Transit Road, and I think this has pretty well been borne out as the population has moved into the suburbs. In February of 1957, the Board of Trustees passed the necessary resolution to purchase this land. It was approved by the county and the state soon after that. The groundbreaking ceremonies took place in September 1958. Although by that time construction had already started, with the Siegfried Company as the general contractors and Dwayne Lyman Associates as the architects. The groundbreaking took place, as I say, in September, and it was a rainy day. And people were all bemoaning the fact that the rain was spoiling the groundbreaking ceremonies. But I can still remember a gentleman from Utica who was on the Board of Trustees of State University and here for the ceremony. His name was Mr. Boyd Golder. And Mr. Golder said, "This is a good day. It's simply the weather that is bad." And I think that was really the way we all felt. It was a good day for Erie County Technical Institute. Certainly a person who deserved a great deal of credit getting the campus started and the construction finally completed was Mr. George Gleasner, who was chairman of the Board of Trustees. George spent many a Tuesday down at the county buildings talking to the then Board of Supervisors, getting their attention, getting their support for the new campus. I understand that it was said at the time that several capital projects were put aside so that the campus could be built. And certainly it's very appropriate that our administration building be named Gleasner Hall in honor of George Gleasner, the chairman of the board at that time. Before leaving the campus on Elmwood Avenue, we did start 2 new programs. The mechanical program had proven to be very popular, and one phase of the mechanical program that we had stressed was the production planning area, along with the design and other areas of the mechanical program. We did have a big demand for work in planning, estimating, and so forth in the mechanical field. Therefore, we did start a program known as production planning at that time, and Mr. Edward Fix, who had been an instructor in the mechanical program, became the head of the new production planning program. Also, a program in medical office assisting was started at that time. Since this required a certain amount of chemistry as well as medical programs, Mr. Lloyd Olson from the chemistry department was the first head of the medical office assisting program. These programs required a certain amount of new equipment, but could be started with a minimum outlay of capital involvement. At this time, the Institute on Elmwood Avenue had had its ceiling of students limited restriction removed, and our enrollment had gradually crept up until the time we left the Elmwood campus. We had approximately 1,100 full-time students crowded into that one building. We also had a very significant evening program of probably in the vicinity of 2,000 part-time students. So the need for the new campus was very evident. Before leaving the Elmwood campus, I think it also should be mentioned that in 1957, the Institute staff did contemplate going after Middle States regional accreditation. Material had been supplied to the faculty concerning all of the work involved in such a visitation, and it looked like a big undertaking at that time, since the new campus in 57 and 58, the new campus was being planned, and this required a lot of work on a part of many people with planning of the new buildings, the new offices, the new laboratories with all their equipment. So it was decided that any application for Middle States approval would be postponed until we were in the new campus with new facilities and better surroundings. And it so happened that almost 10 years were to elapse before Middle States accreditation was finally achieved. 1960 July saw the final sessions in the building on Elmwood Avenue. With the closing of the school year, we had 1 month, the month of August, to move from our rented facilities to our new campus in Amherst. Due to a building trade strike that summer, the new campus facilities did not get completed on time. The workmen were running now about 6 weeks behind schedule. Consequently, our move was a hindrance to them, but we did have to move. We had no place to go. We had plans to start on the new campus in the fall of 1960, so the move had to be made. During the month of August, trucks were shuttled back and forth between the building on Elmwood Avenue and the new campus. New equipment was brought in, and classes were getting underway in the fall of 1960 on the brand new campus in Amherst. One other significant aspect was the naming of one of the buildings at the North Campus. I mentioned the Gleasner Hall, the administration building, but that was named later. But the first building to be actually designated in memory of someone was that of the library, and it was known as the Richard R. Dry Memorial Library. And fortunately, Mr. Dry was alive at the time and did realize that the building was to be named in his memory, and this was a great tribute to him, and I know that Mr. Dry was very proud of the fact that the library was named for him. Also at that time, in the move to the North Campus, while I had been head of the mechanical department for a number of years and had taken a great part in the planning of the mechanical building, its laboratories, its equipment, I was not to see the actual culmination of the work in the mechanical building on the new campus, because in June of 1960 I had the good fortune to be promoted to Associate Dean at that time. This was what we now call the Dean of Academic Affairs, and it became my responsibility then to supervise all the academic programs of the 10 curricula that we had on the campus at that time. However, the move to the new campus was not without its problems. As I mentioned before, the new campus was not really complete when we moved in. To those of us who had been with the Institute in 1946 and 47, it seemed like history was repeating itself. We were holding classes while the workmen were still going about the final phases of construction. They were laying linoleum in the classrooms, they were hanging light fixtures and doing the final phases, and this provided quite a little bit of interruption for us. It also made us lose a complete security system, because all of our rooms had to be opened so that the workmen could go in and out of the rooms as they needed. I'm not sure how many of our supplies and pieces of equipment we did lose, but I'm sure that we did lose security. The inside of the buildings was not the only problem. We also had problems on the outside. Our parking lot was not finished, and our sidewalks were not complete. This increased not only the problem for the students, but it also increased our maintenance problems, because there was a tracking in of mud and dirt into all the buildings. But throughout these trying times, most of the faculty and students maintained a real sense of humor. One of the most comical gags occurred during this time when we had a heavy rain. In the building, the area between the construction technology and chemical technology buildings was a huge puddle of water. It stood directly where a sidewalk was supposed to be. Some student with a real sense of humor had placed a shirt sleeve and a glove on a stick and then stuck it in the middle of this pool of water. It appeared very realistically that someone had completely disappeared out of sight and just an arm was sticking up. I also recall a young lady who was coming to register and was walking between the library and the student center when she stepped off the end of the sidewalk and went almost up to her knees in mud. Mrs. White, who was in the cafeteria during registration, took pity on this young lady, got a hold of her and had her washed up and gave her slippers to wear while she completed her registration. Such were just a few of the things that happened to us during those first few weeks on our new campus. One thing that did really surprise us was the feelings of some of the students, particularly the class of '61. They had spent, if you remember, they had spent 1 year on each campus, the old campus on Elmwood Avenue and the new campus here in Amherst. And they were not overly happy with this new, beautiful campus. It seems that they missed the close associations of the small building at Elmwood Avenue, where everybody saw everybody each day. I think some of the faculty had something of the same feelings too. The year of 60, 61, and 62 saw our enrollment increase very rapidly. In fact, in 61, I believe we were pretty close to 1,600 students on this campus, after having only about 1,100 on the Elmwood campus. It seemed certain that the 2,000 full-time student capacity that this building, this campus was supposed to accommodate would soon be realized. All of our programs flourished. Our athletic program with the new gymnasium, the beautiful facility that we had, gave a great impetus to all of our athletic programs at the track, the outdoor baseball diamond, the tennis courts, all gave us a strong incentive to have very good athletic programs, which continued under Mr. George Killian. Our student activities also prospered because we had a student center building. The second floor of the student center building was given over entirely to student activities. The Element, which was then the Institutor, the Arrow, the yearbook, other publications, all had their own room, their own equipment, and the students felt that they would take advantage of these opportunities. Also, we had the lounges, the game rooms, and so forth. So everything prospered very greatly when we did move to this campus in Amherst. The evening division also grew very dramatically in these first few years under the leadership of Dr. Norman T. Whitmore. We had several thousand students in the evening division at that time. It should be noted that the evening division was completely self-supporting and received no monies from either the county or the state. As time went on, this would have to change, as it will be noted just a little later. Not only did the number of students increase, but also the number of curricula. The first new program to be offered on the new campus was a program in medical laboratory technology. This program shared the instructional space with the medical assisting and the chemical technology curriculums. Its goal was to supply technicians for the rapidly expanding health service field, and it proved to be a very popular curriculum. The engineering-related technical curriculums were still operating on the cooperative employment schedule. Consequently, the academic calendar still was divided into the 4 quarters. While the co-op program had many good points, it was beginning to cause some problems with faculty morale, since some of the faculty members had 4 quarters of teaching instruction and others had only 3, although the total yearly teaching load remained the same for each group. Pressure was also building for a second campus. Citizens Committee from the South towns had meetings with the administration and the Board of Trustees concerning the starting of a campus somewhere south of the city of Buffalo. Mr. Paul Rordance was the leading spokesman for this committee, and it also included a number of the secondary school superintendents of the South towns as well as other civic-minded people. In 1963, the Institute experienced a rapid change in the administrative structure. Niagara County, I guess, was tired of sending its students and paying for their tuition at Erie Technical Institute, so Niagara County decided that they wanted a community college of their own. In their search for a new president for that new college, they picked Dr. Ernest Notar, who was dean here at Erie at that time. Dr. Notar left our administrative staff in April of 1963. In May, it was my good fortune to be named dean and succeed Dr. Notar in that position. Mr. Rexford Billings, head of the chemistry, was promoted to associate dean, and Mr. Arden Pratt became head of the chemical tech program in Mr. Billings' place. Shortly after the promotion to dean, in that summer, Mr. Spring, the president, became ill and died in the fall of 1963. As of November 1st, then I was named as acting president, as well as holding the position of dean. So in the short period of about 6 months, it became my job to move from the associate dean to president, all in that period of time, with very little preparation for each position. As it turned out, I was to be acting president for the next 2 years. A ruling by the State University Board of Trustees stated that no person could be named president of a unit of State University from within the staff of that institution. This ruling originally applied only to the fully state-supported units of State University, but subsequently the Board of Trustees of State University extended this ruling to also include the community colleges. With this ruling on the books, it very effectively blocked any chance of my being promoted to president of the college on a permanent basis. However, our Board of Trustees immediately took up the issue with this ruling and began a 2-year fight to have it rescinded. When Samuel Gould, Dr. Samuel Gould, became chancellor of the State University of New York in about 1965, he was sympathetic to our trustees' position and prevailed upon the State University trustees to rescind this ruling. I might note that our Board of Trustees, led by Mr. Kittinger, Mr. Sylvester, Dr. Corsett, Mr. Wegman, and others, were given credit throughout the entire university system for having this unpopular ruling rescinded. In January of 1966, I appeared before the State University trustees and finally received the permanent presidential appointment. Thus culminated 2 years of difficult times, not only for myself, but for everyone at Erie County Technical Institute. Immediately upon my permanent appointment, I wanted no one except Dr. Whitmore to become dean. At that time, he was the director of the evening division and had done an outstanding job in building up the evening division, giving it supreme leadership. Dr. Whitmore was very, very reluctant to leave that position and assume the position of dean of the college. With a little bit of arm twisting, however, he did finally see it my way and became the dean, and Mr. Billings was then named associate dean. The offerings as well as the students continued to grow throughout these years. Going back to 1964, we had almost our full complement of students, 2,000 full-time students on campus here, and approaching 4,000 part-time students in our evening and extended division programs. I believe it was in 1964 that we began to phase out the cooperative program. There were a number of reasons for this. I've already stated one, that the morale of the faculty posed a problem because of the varying teaching loads. We were also finding, even in 1964, with the increasing number of students, the number of positions that we could obtain in industry did not keep pace with our growing enrollment. Therefore, percentage-wise, a smaller and smaller number of students were having the advantage of the cooperative program. Also, the health programs, such as dental hygiene, optical dispensing, and so forth, were not part of the co-op program. Therefore, it seemed imperative to us, as we looked down the road with expanding curriculums we knew we were going to have on campus, a growing student body, and the fact that we could not keep pace with the cooperative jobs, it seemed important or imperative that we begin thinking of terminating a program that had been very, very successful, a program that had helped us in our relationships with industry, it helped us in our placement of graduates, and it had, as I say, many good points. But it seemed to us in the administration that the problems that we were facing far outweighed these good points. Consequently, in 1964, the co-op program was phased out after carefully discussing the change with all of our advisory committees in the technical programs. The various advisory committees would meet about once or twice a year, and our first step in eliminating the co-op program was to explain to the advisory committees, these are people from industry, our problems and the reasons for our change. We met a little opposition from some of the industry, but I think most of them could see our problems and agreed that the change was necessary. Even with the elimination of the co-op program, we still maintain the trimester or three-term schedule for several years. It's very difficult to take and change course content, subject matter, and therefore we felt it necessary to maintain still the 3 terms, which we did until 1969 when the college went on the more traditional 2-semester basis. About this same time, the evening division was having problems with its budget. As I've said several times, that program was entirely self-supporting. But as the program grew and the expenses of the evening division went up, the number that had to be enrolled in each class had to increase in order for that class to pay for itself. And we were having problems with numbers. We had to drop some classes where the numbers enrolled in the class in the evening division was not sufficient to maintain the charges. Therefore, Dr. Whitmore had come to me and asked what we should do. Well, the answer I told him was pretty obvious, and that was that the evening division budget should become a part of our total budget. And that way, the county and the state, as well as the students, would all share in the expense of the evening program. So after discussing it with the county officials and our board of trustees, we did mesh the evening school budget in with our regular full-time budget. The result produced a rather difficult time for us, in as much as the sudden change in revenues increased our student revenues considerably, and we found ourselves in a position where we had more student monies than we required and could legally hold. The State University took rather a dim view of this and suggested that we reduce our tuition So for 1 year in the evening division, we practically cut our tuition in half so that we could use up the excess student revenue that had been generated the year before when the evening division was put on a partnership sustaining budget. This did solve the problem of the evening school as far as the finances went, and from then on we had no difficulty. By 1965, new programs were put in place on the campus here. Data processing, secretarial science, business administration, and police science was moved into a day division curriculum. It had previously been completely an evening school division open only to officers in police force at the time. This we moved into the day program and made a program for people beginning in the police science work. These programs also proved very popular, and we found ourselves completely crowded for space. Our business and secretarial programs took over one of the student activity rooms in the student union. This posed a real problem for us, but we were using every space we could on the campus to take care of these new programs. During this time, we were also under constant pressure to begin offering the university parallel or liberal arts program. This pressure came not only from the local groups that I mentioned before, but it also came from the State University Office of the Vice Chancellor. At one of the meetings in Albany, the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Martirana, said publicly there were only 2 community colleges in the state not offering the liberal arts or university parallel program. One of those was the Fashion Institute in New York City, which was never supposed to offer liberal arts, and the other school was Erie County Tech. I guess we were being held up as a rather poor example of what a community college should be. However, we had such a strong commitment from our historical background to the career type of programs that we felt that our first priority should be to this type of program. We also felt there were a number of schools, colleges, and universities in the Buffalo area all offering the liberal arts program, and it seemed to us that our job, at that time at least, was to offer as much of the technical and related programs that we could. At that particular time, we could not have offered the liberal arts program anyway, simply because of the lack of space. As I've indicated, we were well over the 2,000 student enrollment that we'd projected for this campus, and every bit of available space was being used. It was then in 1965 and 66 that we began planning for the Amherst campus. It had become very evident that the size of the campus was not enough, not adequate to take care of the students that we knew were coming. So the plan was to double the size of the North or Amherst campus to approximate about 4,000 full-time students. In this expansion plan, we did provide space for a liberal arts program, a nursing program, an occupational therapy assisting program, and a program in inhalation therapy. At that time, the architectural firm of Cadeni, Smith, and Fitzgerald had been engaged to begin the preliminary planning for the expansion of this campus. However, in 1966, a new element or a new operation was introduced into our work. I was called to New York City in April of that year and told or suggested that Erie County Tech become the sponsor of a new type of education known as an urban center, and was to be given in the city of Buffalo. The urban center was to give a one-year program, tuition-free, to the disadvantaged minority group in the city of Buffalo. We were told in this meeting in New York that this program had to be in operation by the fall of 1966. When you recall that the fall of 1966 was an election year for the governor, then you realize the political implications of this fact. I can well remember on my plane ride back from New York City the questions that came to mind. First of all, just what is an urban center? We knew very little about it. The question was, where are we going to get a building for it in the city of Buffalo? Who would supervise it? Where would we get the staff? All these questions went through my mind as I was flying back from New York City. And I must admit, I was pretty much at sea as to just where we were going with this program. I had to meet with our own board of trustees because they had to approve the urban center program too. We also had Dr. Martirana and some of the county officials come to Buffalo for a meeting with our board to have an explanation given as to what the urban centers would do, how we were to be associated with them, and so forth. Our board did approve the acceptance of the urban center as a program that we would supervise. So the year of 1966 became a very, very busy one for all of us. I tapped Mr. Monford Schrader of the mechanical department as the director of the urban center, the first director. He scoured the city of Buffalo looking for a temporary building that would house the urban center. We finally settled on the Jackson building, which is located at 220 Delaware Avenue at the corner of Chippewa. The entire third floor of the Jackson building was renovated to provide the educational programs for this new urban center. The programs included dental assisting, typing, key punch operation, drafting, and preparation for the GED exam, the government equivalency diploma for high school graduates. Later on, other programs were added, but the urban center, I feel, became a very successful operation. It helped many of the students from the inner city. It lasted until 1974, when a similar type of program offered by the University of Buffalo appeared to be in duplication, so the state, which was funding both programs, the state insisted that the two programs be merged and be incorporated under one unit. The final decision was to close out the urban center. Our sponsorship would cease, and the university would take over the entire operation, which became known as the EOC, or the Equal Opportunity Center. We had been hopeful at the time that some of the technical programs, particularly dental assisting and key punch operation and so forth, could have been incorporated in a new city campus that was in our thinking at the time, and of course was in operation by '74. But this proved to be financially impossible due to the fact that one operation was tuition free and the other one was not, and it didn't seem as if we could reconcile this problem. At the same time in 1966 that we had the urban center, we were also preparing to expand the Amherst campus. There was a lot of work to be done with the architect that had been appointed. The startup of the urban center, the administration was also involved in looking at possible sites for a campus south of the city of Buffalo. As you remember, the Citizens Committee had been after us for several years to start a south campus, and we looked at 10 sites during the year of 1966 as a possible location for a south campus. We also were committed to an urban campus within the city of Buffalo. This proved to be a much more difficult task, but it did finally come into being. Plans for the academic and architectural expansion of the North Campus were moving steadily ahead. What was desperately needed at this time was a person to take care of the facilities, the planning of the facilities, and much of the work that had to fall on my shoulders was just too much with all the work that we had at the time. So we did kind of do a little bit of an underhanded thing. We borrowed one of the faculty members from the construction department to help me with the planning and the details that were needed in all of the construction that we had coming up. We were able finally to secure an administrative position in the budget entitled Supervisor of Facilities Planning. This position was an absolute necessity as we faced in many construction projects. Mr. George Kokenauer from the construction department, who had helped us out before, now moved into this position officially. His service during the expansion of the North Campus, planning the construction of the South Campus, and getting the city campus operating in temporary facilities was simply outstanding. One must remember that on all of these construction projects, we were dealing with both the county and the state agencies, and there was much duplication concerning reports, drawings, and so forth. I and the college will always be indebted to George Kokenauer for the excellent job that he did for the several years that he occupied this position. In planning the expansion of the North Campus, we learned from previous experience that it was good to have the buildings as close together as possible. Therefore, in this expansion, we did instruct the architect to keep all of the new buildings within the geographical boundaries of the former campus, of the present campus. We also started in 1966 and 67 the rather tedious process of getting Middle States accreditation. This, you may recall, was deferred from the time that we were on Elmwood Avenue, and we were housed, and we had to wait to be housed in the new campus in Amherst in 1960. However, with President Spring's death in 1963, and my situation as acting president, which lasted for almost 2 years, it was felt that we couldn't embark on a Middle States accreditation procedure at that time. So it did wait until 1966-67. Dr. Whitmore headed the General Faculty Committee to begin the accreditation task. This proved to be a long and frustrating quest, with the final Middle States accreditation being granted in April 1972. It should be noted that a number of curricula for some years had received accreditation by special agencies. For example, the electrical, mechanical, construction, and chemistry technologies were all accredited by the Engineering Council for Professional Development. The dental hygiene had been accredited by the American Dental Association, the ophthalmic dispensing department by the American Board of Opticianry. And of course, all of the programs were registered and accredited by the State University of New York and the State Education Department. Groundbreaking for the expansion of North Campus took place in June of 1967. Present were the county officials, headed by County Executive Rath. Dr. Kenneth Doran, who was assistant of the Vice Chancellor for State University, was also here. Our trustees, faculty, and students all took part in this groundbreaking. The expansion of the North Campus during the years of 67, 68, 69 proved to be a difficult time for all concerned. As was mentioned above, we tried to tie all the buildings as closely together as possible so as to make outside travel as short as possible. With the exception of the gymnasium, every other building was invaded by the construction project. In the student center, the bookstore was expanded into what had been the coffee shop, and a brand new and large coffee shop was added to the eastern end of the student center. The 4 technical buildings on the east side of the campus were linked together with classrooms and laboratories and large lecture halls. This entire complex carried the name of the Bretzker Technical Laboratories in honor of Dr. Max Bretzker, one of the original trustees, in 1946, and had served for 25 years. The library had to be greatly expanded, and the entire east wall was removed and a large and beautiful section added. In the library expansion, we wanted to create a large entrance facing the technical complex so that students would have easy and quick access to the library. This, I think, we did achieve. Also, we added a large entrance to the student center so that students could come directly from the technical buildings into the student center for their luncheon and book needs. In Gleasner Hall, which was the administration building, a great many internal changes took place by changing what had been classrooms into office space, housing the Division of Continuing Education, changing the physics laboratories into a computer center. Also, a large 2-story classroom, lab, and office building directly behind Gleasner Hall completed the expansion. The large classroom building was named in honor of Spencer C. Kittinger, Chairman of the Board of Trustees, who was terminally ill at that time. The cornerstone setting for the new buildings took place in October 1968. Mr. Kittinger and County Executive Edward Rath both took part in this ceremony, and it is unfortunate that both were to die within the following 2 or 3 weeks. In addition to these two, we also had representatives of our trustees. Mr. Wegman, Mr. Edward J. Wegman, then succeeded Mr. Kittinger as chairman of the board. During the construction of the North Campus, plans were also going forward for the 2 other campuses, one in the South Towns and one in the city of Buffalo. It had been agreed by our Board of Trustees, the county executive, and the county legislature that both campuses, the southern and the one in the city, would move ahead as quickly as possible, but not necessarily at the same pace. It was obvious that land acquisition for the South Campus would be much easier and cheaper than that of the city campus. 10 sites in the South Towns of Hamburg and Orchard Park were inspected by the trustees and county officials. Interestingly enough, one of the sites was the so-called DuPont site at Abbott and Southwestern Boulevard, where Rich Stadium is now situated. The 2 sites finally selected were known as the Big Tree site and the Howard Road site, both in the village or town of Hamburg. The Big Tree site was the one recommended, and that is where the South Campus is now located. Approximately 200 acres bounded by Southwestern Boulevard, Big Tree Road, and Abbott Road were eventually purchased. Some 40 acres on Abbott Road was to be subsequently sold back to the county for parking at Rich Stadium. We desired direct access to Abbott Road from the campus, but the Commissioner of Public Works had tried to make access by a rather circuitous route around the newly acquired 40 acres parking and then through the woods to Abbott Road. This proved to be, to us, a very unacceptable arrangement, and the administration and trustees held out for a straight, direct access to Abbott Road from the campus. And that is what we have today, a college-owned right-of-way directly through the middle of the stadium parking lot to Abbott Road. While this at the South was going on, we were also involved in finding land for a city campus. At about this time, there was considerable talk about locating the new campus of State University of New York at Buffalo, which we call UB, on the waterfront in the city of Buffalo. In order to resolve this problem, a task force headed by Dr. Mason Gross of Rutgers University, I believe, was to evaluate the waterfront site as a possible university location. Dr. Gross's committee finally concluded in its report that the waterfront site was not a suitable one for a large university complex, and seemed to have added as an afterthought that it would make an excellent site for an urban community college. For this reason, the first site within the city was that was to be given serious consideration was this, the so-called waterfront site. It included about 20 acres of urban renewal land located between the Niagara section of the Thruway and the harbor. There was also talk of securing about 20 acres of the southern end of LaSalle Park, thus making a very acceptable 40-acre site for the city campus. This location was given serious consideration, even to the extent that the architect for the urban renewal drew up tentative plans and made a 3-dimensional model of a possible college to be located on the waterfront. However, the question of access to the site proved to be a real problem. Not only was the Thruway a boundary to the east, but the New York Central railroad tracks also ran next to the Thruway. While a road to the campus was possible under the elevated section of the Thruway to reach the campus site, it meant crossing the central tracks at grade. We were told that in all probability the New York Central would abandon these tracks and use the inner loop in the city of Buffalo to move freight up the river. However, when this was broached to the New York Central, they refused to do it, even though we found out later that they did not own the right-of-way, didn't even pay for it, and didn't pay taxes on it. But still, they would not abandon this railroad tracks. After some discussions with the officials of the city concerning a bridge which would give us access to the site, the project was dropped. The bridge proved to be too expensive, and our Board of Trustees would not approve the site if it meant crossing tracks at grade with the possibility of accidents. This took place in the fall of 1969. Next in the city came the so-called Crossroads site. This was located at the foot of Main Street in South Park Avenue, across from the old DL&W station. Since the new rapid transit was being planned and the southern terminus would be right there, that was indeed a plus for this site. Mayor Sedita of Buffalo also indicated that several streets could be closed. That would provide a very good and square site for the city campus. Furthermore, the urban renewal promised to give several acres of land immediately south of the Memorial Auditorium for campus purposes. This site now is where the new Naval Park is housed. All necessary approval for the Crossroads site was obtained from the Board of Trustees, the County Executive, the County Legislature, and the State University of New York in 1971. There are official documents indicating that this approval had been given to build the city campus at the Crossroads site. However, as the cost projections came in, this site was also finally dropped as being too expensive. During all of this time, there were some persons who questioned the need of a city campus. In order to demonstrate the need, our Board of Trustees, along with County Executive B. John Tatuska, decided to look for temporary facilities within the city of Buffalo. I believe at least 12 to 14 buildings were inspected by Mr. Kokenauer, Dr. Whitmore, persons from the Department of Public Works, and myself. In fact, one of these sites that we looked at that time was the old post office building. Many were not just suitable for a college program. When we learned that the Bishop O'Hearn High School, located at Main and Riley Streets, was to be closed, Mr. Kokenauer and I made an inspection and found it to be the best for our purposes of any that we had seen. Apparently, our visit to this Catholic high school caused some concern and comments by the students and faculty, because the nun who was the principal told us later that she had to make up a story and try to tell the students that we were just simply salesmen who were looking over the building. Later on, it was announced that the school would close, and we proceeded with plans to occupy the buildings and initiate the city campus. This took place in 1971 with Dr. Oscar Smuckler as the vice president. In order to get the program started at the city campus as quickly as possible, we did move several curricula from the North Campus, almost in total, to the city campus. Courses such as business administration, secretarial science, liberal arts, which could be started quickly with a minimum amount of laboratories and space, were started. In addition to these programs, we also started a child care program, which was needed in the city of Buffalo, and a year later we started the radiologic program there. Dedication of this temporary facility took place in the fall of that year. Our belief that a city campus was necessary was soon justified as the enrollment increased each year. The lease was to be for 5 years, since we had every expectation that a permanent campus would be built by that time. Unfortunately, as we all know now, those 5 years stretched out to be over 11 years before the city campus had its own building, its own campus in what was the old post office building. Getting back to the North Campus, the new facilities were ready for occupancy by September 1969. But our problems were not over, because it turned out that we were not to be given the necessary funds to start the new programs in nursing, liberal arts, engineering science, inhalation therapy that had all been planned for the new facilities. Consequently, we began notifying many students who had already been accepted and who had applied. We could not accept them for these programs, simply because we did not have the funding for the faculty. We had the buildings, we had the equipment, but we didn't have the faculty. When this became known to the press and to the public in general, soon monies became available, and we were able to then send letters a second time to the students telling them that we would admit them to the new programs. So in September 1969, ECTI ceased to exist, and we became ECC, or Erie Community